Okay. Let's learn about the Darby Canyon Ice Cave incident.
In August of 2018, a couple stood at the mouth of a very large and very unique cave.
Uh-huh.
Although they had prepared for their trip and brought supplies, they had no idea that the place they were entering was not what they had read about.
Okay.
This is their horrifying story along with another disturbing caving story, and as always, viewer discretion is
I
strongly
fucking hate
advised.
caves. My fucking god.
On Saturday, February 28th, 19...
Oh, there's several stories. Oh my god. Middle-aged man with 6 children dives headfirst into a cave called Demon's Death Hole and dies. Man. Caves that flood suddenly are nightmare fuel? Yeah.
1987, 7 members of Grinnell College's outdoor recreation program gathered near the limestone opening of Miller's Cave in northeast Iowa.
Uh-huh.
Located
Shout out
about
to Iowa.
3.5 miles north of Luana, Miller's Cave is anything but a place for beginners. It's essentially a vertical shaft that plunges more than 100 feet or 30
Yikes.
meters into the earth.
Yikes!
The opening at the top measures only a few feet across.
This looks like
and
my
from
Terraria
there,
save.
The shaft widens to only 6 feet or 2 meters in diameter at its
Yikes.
maximum as it descends.
Oh, that's so
That
close.
means the only way to access it is to rappel down and climb back up using ropes and rock climbing gear. The air inside also typically hovers somewhere in the upper 40s Fahrenheit or around 9 Celsius.
So it's
And
cold.
the stream that sometimes trickles through it runs even colder when water is present. With all that said though, the group of 7, which included 5 students and 2 advisors, had all trained for this day. They had practiced climbing techniques beforehand and demonstrated that they could rappel and ascend safely during controlled simulations back on campus. The forecast for the day had called for a storm that would bring both snow and rain.
No
but when
fucking
the group
way.
began their descent at around 12:30 p.m., nothing was falling from the sky just yet. One by one, the climbers lowered themselves into the shaft, beginning the careful process required of descending into a vertical cave. Each person controlled their rappel device carefully, feeding rope through at a steady pace while keeping their feet braced against the rock walls.
Oh my god.
By early afternoon, the group was gathered at the bottom, with no idea of how bad things were about to get.
Oh
The
no,
group was
man.
being led by an experienced outdoorswoman named Catherine. She was 38 years old and worked at Grinnell College as an assistant professor of geology and physical education. She also served as an advisor to the outdoor recreation program. With roughly 200 students involved, the program offered everything from casual day hikes to skiing trips to climbing challenges. The other advisor along for the trip to Miller's Cave was 29-year-old Mike, who worked in the college's computer services division.
Past tense, that's a good
He wasn't a
sign.
faculty
No!
member, but he often joined the outdoor recreation program activities because he simply loved the outdoors. It wasn't until about 6 p.m. that the situation inside the cave began to change.
They were in the cave for 5
Up
hours?
until then, the group had been dealing with normal cave moisture. It's not uncommon for places like Miller's Cave to be damp, even on dry days, but outside, the storm that had been predicted began while the group was inside. Runoff then began pouring into the creek bed that fed directly into the cave entrance. At first, it seemed like an increase in dripping, but it quickly became much more than that. Water began falling from the opening high above them as the normally dry creek bed at the surface had turned into a flowing stream as rain poured down. That water was now traveling straight down to the shaft where they were. Now, when you're standing at the bottom of a vertical cave and water starts pouring in directly overhead, there aren't many options. So after some brief yet careful consideration, Catherine chose to try to have everyone climb out quickly before things got worse.
Oh no.
One of the students named David started up first around the time the water started to become much more intense. Catherine told him to ascend to the mouth of the cave and then send down an additional rope to help the others safely and quickly get out. Under normal conditions, this plan would have worked out just fine. By the time David reached the top though, somewhere around 6:30 p.m., the rain outside was falling hard. He was soaked to the bone by the time he emerged from the shaft and dropped the second rope down. A freshman named Jonathan then followed, and the climb that would typically take around 20 minutes on the best of days became much more difficult. Cold water hammered down on him the entire way.
Oh my god.
As he ascended, his hands went numb from the freezing runoff. When he finally reached the surface, he was so exhausted and cold that he actually needed help from David to remove his equipment. At this point, communication between those at the surface and those below began to break down. The noise of rushing water echoing off the vertical shaft made it hard to hear, so those at the top didn't really know what was going on down below. David then lowered dry clothes down on a line, as Catherine also instructed him to do. It was a small attempt to stave off the frigid conditions inside that would end up having no impact because of how bad things had gotten. A student named Matthew was prepared to ascend next, but by then, the rushing water coming in had increased the sense of urgency among those still at the bottom. So as Matthew climbed next, Mike...
Oh no. I would like to say I respect the advisors for going last. How do you ask someone to do this? Hey, want to rappel in a 100-foot deep cave with limited supplies and have some fun? Man, I don't know, man.
began his own ascent. Only a few dozen feet from the top, though, Mike found himself suspended in a narrow shaft while icy water cascaded directly onto him from above. Every moment on the rope meant more exposure to the cold and a growing risk of hypothermia. There was so much water coming in that there was simply no way to avoid it while dangling on a rope, and Mike was getting the absolute worst of it. About 30 to 40 minutes into his climb, which was already much longer than the typical ascent, Mike began yelling for help, and his screams would go on for some time. Cold water doesn't take long to drastically affect the body, and when you're suspended from a rope and unable to move, hands stiffen, grip weakens, and muscles fatigue, all of which are sure signs that hypothermia is setting in. Mike was struggling badly, and that's when Catherine began her ascent to offer him the help that he was screaming for. She had remained below while the rescue group went ahead of her, but when she heard Mike calling for help, she clipped in and started climbing toward him.
Oh my god.
By then, the shaft had turned into a full-out waterfall. 2 other students remained on the cave floor and found a higher area within the system to get away from the main flow of freezing water. Meanwhile, midway up the shaft, Mike and Catherine were suspended in the rushing water with no ability to climb or lower themselves back down. It was only a matter of time in those conditions before the inevitable happened. Mike eventually stopped screaming, but not because he had been rescued. Hypothermia had taken hold and progressed quickly, causing him to lose consciousness before draining the life from him entirely.
He's gonna fall on her.
Catherine, meanwhile, was so overcome with the incoming water that she actually drowned on the rope. By the time rescuers got to Miller's Cave, it was already far too late. It wouldn't be until 9 p.m. when first responders and rescuers arrived at the scene. At first, they couldn't even enter the cave. The water pouring down from the shaft made descent impossible, so before anyone could go in safely, the stream feeding the entrance had to be diverted. Rescue crews worked to reroute the flow using sandbags and pumps as they attempted to channel the rushing water away from the cave's opening. In fact, even after those efforts, water was still pouring down the shaft, but it was at least greatly reduced. Once conditions improved enough to attempt entry, rescuers began to lower themselves in, while others at the top began to pull one of the ropes the club had been using to escape. That rope was pulled about 20 feet or 6 meters before becoming stuck, and rescuers who were descending would quickly figure out why. They encountered Mike roughly 30 feet below the entrance, and he was wedged in place. His body was stuck beneath a rock lip, and to those who discovered him, it was clear that he had likely been dead for several hours. Further down, Catherine's body was also located. Around 3 a.m. on March 1st, the 2 students who were trapped in the lower reaches of Miller's Cave were rescued and brought to the surface.
Okay, they lived. All the
None of
students
5 students
lived.
who made it out suffered any serious physical injuries, but tragically, Mike and Catherine would pass away.
Oh my god.
In August of 2018...
Well, I think that's what the advisors would have wanted, because they sent all the kids out first, so they wanted the kids to get out safely. So at least there's that. At least there's that. Fuck, that's depressing.
Spencer was about to turn 31 years old, and he had a creative idea for how he wanted to celebrate. He and his wife, 24-year-old Jessica, would spend the day exploring an ice cave they had read about
Fuck no,
online.
bro.
The couple
If I'm ever in a fucking relationship, someone goes, you want to explore an ice cave for our anniversary? I'd break up with them. Clearly, you don't know me well enough.
lived in Idaho Falls,
What the
Idaho,
fuck?
and outdoor adventures weren't new to them. They had been rock climbing for years and had a love of challenging hikes.
Not
In
me,
fact,
bro.
The outdoors were such a part of their lives that Spencer proposed to Jessica on the summit of Mount Bora, the
Guys, I like a hike as much as the next person, but I like easy hikes, not challenging hikes.
highest peak in the state. For Spencer's birthday trip, the couple decided on Darby Canyon Ice Cave in western Wyoming, not far from the Idaho border. They planned to enter through the ice cave and eventually exit through a system of passages that connected to it. From what they'd been able to gather, the full underground route could take anywhere from 6 to 12 hours, depending on conditions. In the weeks leading up to the trip, they researched everything they could find about the cave, which really wasn't much.
Want to eat garlic knots and drink Red Bulls while watching Netflix? That is what you would ask me. See? Thank you, Snob. Jesus.
Spencer made calls to track down a map and even reached out to local officials, but there wasn't much available. The cave was known to be complicated and constantly shifting because of the
Oh.
ice, so published routes were limited. Either way, on the morning of
Yikes.
Saturday, August 11th, the couple left their 1-year-old daughter with Jessica's mother and
Oh
told her
my
that if
God,
went
they
back
have
by
a
midnight,
daughter.
she should contact search and rescue. This was a precaution they often took before heading out into the wilderness. Spencer and Jessica then made the drive to Wyoming and arrived at the trailhead. Before they even reached the cave, they'd have to hike about 5 miles, and it took most of the morning. By the time the couple reached the mouth of the cave, the summer sun had been beating down on them for hours. The hike there was steady and uphill, and they were sweating through their shirts by the time they arrived at the
Oh my
entrance
God,
around
they
noon.
hypothermia, don't they?
As they stepped closer to it, they could feel a rush of cold air pouring out. It felt like someone had opened a freezer door. Once they cooled down, they started to layer up with extra clothing and gloves.
Okay.
While temperatures outside were hovering around 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 26 Celsius, inside the cave was a much different story. Entering the cave as well was like stepping into a completely new world, one where the walls were coated in slick ice. As they went into the darkness, they could hardly believe how beautiful it was through the beams of their headlamps. The ice cave was unlike anything they'd experienced before, and they eagerly continued on through the main passage toward their first rappel point.
Yikes.
Now, much like other caves, Darby Canyon Ice Cave wasn't a singular tunnel. It was more like a maze with passages that branched off in different directions and
Yikes.
areas that required climbing. Sections opened into large chambers and narrowed down into tight spaces that required crawling or careful body positioning to get through. In some places, the couple had to move through running water that soaked their pants and boots immediately.
Oh no.
They knew through their research that the cave was considered technical and demanding, so in the early going, everything aligned with their expectations. What they actually didn't know, however, was that the cave system changed frequently over time. Rock falls or shifting water often altered
Yikes.
passages from season to season. They didn't realize this was why they couldn't get their hands on a map. And so the couple worked their way deeper into the ice cave, rappelling down frozen sections and maneuvering tight spaces for the first few hours. They passed old climbing anchors and saw footprints from others who had visited the cave recently, giving them the impression they were on the right track as they went. After about 4 or 5 hours underground, though, the novelty started to wear off. The cave didn't seem to be opening toward an exit the way they expected, and branches off the main tunnel kept appearing. They had also pulled down the rope they'd used to descend earlier, assuming they would not be coming back the same way, so they were fully committed by this point. As more time passed, the couple started checking their watches more frequently as they expected to come upon an exit at any moment. There was some concern at this point, but they were nowhere close to panicking just yet. If the full route could potentially take 12 hours, they still had time, but by the 9th hour inside the ice cave, this became harder to ignore. At one point, they followed a stream that seemed to lead somewhere. The sound of water echoed ahead of them, giving them the impression that the cave continued in that direction. Instead, though, it ended in a wide, circular chamber with no obvious way out. The river they had been following simply stopped and pooled inside the chamber.
Oh my fucking
The couple
God,
then
dog.
searched the room carefully, scanning walls and ceilings with their headlamps, but there was nothing but rocks surrounding them. By the time midnight approached and they entered their 12th hour inside the cave, the temperature was right around freezing, and their clothes were soaked from hours moving through water, which pulled heat away from their bodies. They both knew enough to recognize that the threat of hypothermia was a real one at this point. Finding an exit suddenly became a second priority to keeping warm, so the couple stopped to rest and build a fire. As you might imagine, there isn't much firewood available for harvest inside most caves. and
Does
the
it
couple certainly
fucking
didn't
melt
bring
the
any,
cave and
so they
fucking
made do
flood
with
them?
whatever they had on them. They started by collecting small bits of trash into a pile and burning them, and while it didn't last long, it offered them a bit of warmth they desperately needed at that moment. And unsure of what would happen next as their small garbage fire burned out, they clung to their only hope by then, which was that Jessica's mother would call for help now that it was past midnight. As the night wore on inside the circular dead-end chamber, one of them noticed something they had missed earlier. A rope hung down from above them, dangling near a small waterfall. The bottom of the rope stopped about 10 feet or 3 meters above their heads. If they could somehow reach it, they couldn't help but wonder if it might be a way out of their predicament. The problem was that their bodies were starting to fail them as the early signs of hypothermia were creeping in. Their hands were numb and their legs cramped up. Even simple movements felt sluggish amid all the uncontrollable shivering they were doing. Still, they had to give it a try. Standing 6'2", Spencer positioned himself beneath the rope and lifted Jessica onto his shoulders. She stretched
I hope
upward
to
and
God she
strained her
doesn't
fingers
fall.
as she tried to reach for the bottom of the rope, but every time she managed to touch it, the wet nylon would slip right through her grip. They tried again and again with no luck, and each attempt left them colder and more exhausted. Water from the nearby falls soaked them even further, and when it was clear that it just wasn't going to happen, they gave up for the time being and refocused on warmth again. They rested again and forced themselves to eat small amounts of food before turning to exercise to provide warmth. They did jumping jacks and push-ups just to stay awake and keep the blood moving. When they neared exhaustion, they huddled together and burned more of their belongings. They were out of garbage, so they turned to whatever would catch fire, including Spencer's knee brace, a backpack, pieces of clothing, and even strands of Jessica's hair. The couple sat around the small fire until it inevitably burned itself out, and when it did, the cold returned immediately. Around 6 a.m., they tried for the rope again with the same level of success as their previous attempts. This was the first time Spencer began to wonder if they might not survive their ordeal. The physical discomfort was intense, and the mental strain of it all was wearing on them.
Oh my god.
By noon on Sunday, the couple decided they'd give the rope one last try. Once again,
They've
Jessica
been here a
climbed onto
long
Spencer's
time.
shoulders and managed to grab the rope long enough to tie a slipknot for a foothold. With that taken care of, she rigged a pulley system that would allow her to attach her harness and belay device to the rope. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Now fixed to the rope, Jessica started to slowly inch her way upward. Water poured down from the falls as she began to climb, and within minutes she was soaked again and her hands were nearly useless from the cold. But even despite this, she made her way up and the rope led through a small opening in the chamber ceiling about 30 feet or 9 meters above. And when she reached a narrow ledge there, Jessica pulled herself onto it. Spencer followed behind and joined her on the ledge, where they took a moment to regroup. The rope kept going higher, meaning they'd have to keep climbing if they had any hope of it leading to an exit. But near the top, there was a new problem. The other end of the rope simply disappeared into a crack high up on the wall, but the vertical shaft they were in kept going. In order to make it to the top and see if there was a way out, they'd have to free climb the rest of the way.
Oh no.
Jessica detached from the rope first and grabbed a hold of small protrusions jutting out from the wall.
No.
Fossilized seashells were embedded in the wall and provided the only reliable holds.
Oh no,
As she
bro.
climbed higher and higher, it seemed for a moment that their ordeal was closer and closer to ending. But then, one of the larger shells Jessica grabbed onto broke away from the wall, causing her to free fall. She dropped roughly 15 feet in a near instant, striking her ribs against a rock on the way down. In that split second, it appeared that the trip was going to have a tragic end. If Jessica fell all the way down to the chamber floor and slammed into it, it's unlikely she would have survived the fall. In a move of total desperation, Spencer reached out and managed to catch her before she fell any further.
Oh my god.
The couple then sat on the ledge above the chamber in complete disbelief at the close call. Spencer did his best to comfort Jessica as the reality of the situation hit her, and once she had gathered herself, he shined his light toward the shaft ceiling to get a better look at what they were climbing toward. His heart then sank as he realized that the shaft simply ended in a crack, and the rope that they had tried so hard to climb for so many hours would take them nowhere. Worse still, they had used almost every bit of energy they had left, and what little remained they used to prepare themselves
Nothing,
to rappel
bro.
back down to the chamber floor below. But this is when they heard voices. At first, they weren't sure if it was real, but they stopped moving and listened intently.
Wait, did they get rescued?
Then they heard it again, the faint echo of someone shouting their names.
Holy shit.
Jessica then grabbed for her safety whistle and blew it as hard as she could while Spencer yelled at the top of his lungs. Moments later, light beams appeared from around a bend
Holy
in the
shit, they
cave.
get rescued, bro.
Search and rescue teams
Holy
had been dispatched
shit.
earlier that morning after Jessica's mother made the call around 7 a.m. Volunteers have been working their way through the system, looking for the lost couple for hours by that
Holy
point.
shit.
They had searched areas where people had been trapped before, only to find no sign of the couple. Further into the system, though, the rescuers started to smell smoke, and they began following the scent, which eventually led them to the area where Spencer and Jessica were trapped. It was around 11 p.m. Sunday when rescuers finally found them on that ledge about 30 feet above the chamber floor.
Oh my
It
god.
happened just in time, too. Spencer and Jessica may have had only a few hours remaining before hypothermia reached a point of no return. Rescuers told the couple to remain on the ledge, and one of them began climbing the rope to reach them. It took him about 45 minutes to ascend the rope to reach the ledge where they were stranded, and once there, he gave them dry clothing, water, and heat packs, and he immediately recognized that they were both hypothermic and shaking uncontrollably. He also told them something surprising. They had actually been heading in the correct direction, but they were still only about halfway through the system. To exit the cave, they needed to move through one of the flooded sections of the cave that began inside the chamber, but because of how much water was blocking the way out, Spencer and Jessica never once thought it was the path to freedom. With the help of the rescue team, the couple then descended back to the chamber floor from the ledge and followed the first responders into the water-filled passage they had previously overlooked.
Holy
In some
shit.
areas, the water rose up to Spencer's neck, and at one point, there was only a 4-inch space between the waterline and the ceiling.
Holy
It
shit.
was just enough
They
room to
never
tilt
would
their
have gotten
heads and
out.
breathe as they edged their way through it. However, the couple did eventually make it back out of the cave, and they were immediately met with family members, including their 1-year-old daughter. There were also about 20 volunteers who had spent more than 15 hours searching for them, and as Spencer emerged from the cave, exhausted and pale, the rescuers started singing happy birthday. In total, they'd been underground for roughly 30 hours.
Holy shit.
In the days that followed, Spencer reflected on the planning that had gone into the trip. The information he had found online hadn't painted a complete picture of the Darby Canyon ice cave. He
They got
expected a
so
relatively
fucking lucky.
straightforward underground route of about 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers from entrance to exit. In reality, though, he and Jessica had covered nearly 8 miles or 12.8 kilometers while trying to navigate dozens of unmapped branching passages. Fortunately, search and rescue teams in the area train in that very cave regularly because calls for help are not uncommon. Despite everything they had been through, though, Spencer later said that the ice cave was one of the most incredible places he had ever seen.
Is it to die for, though?
If you made it this
Jesus.
far, thanks so much for watching. And a special thanks to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon or as a channel member.
Holy shit.
If you're interested, we offer early access videos that are released
I'm so
roughly
glad
a week
they
before the
live.
regular YouTube uploads. Also, if you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it using the form found in the description. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
Oh my god. Oh my god. They were... Jesus. Here's the thing I would think to do when my child turns 1 year old is to take my spouse and go into ice, death, nightmare, water, labyrinth cave. Oh my god. Oh, I liked that they lived. Bet you they're still married? Why wouldn't they be? Listen, they both like the outdoors. They're made for each other, bro. They're fucking made for each other. They fucking love caving shit. They're trauma bonded for sure. That made their marriage stronger. I bet they have 3 more kids now. I bet they have 3 more fucking kids. Jesus Christ.